Welcome back to Shredders Not Dead. If they make you bang your head, we'll talk with them or about them. And today I'm very lucky to be joined by Roger Ojersson of Sweden's Katatonia. How are you doing today?
Hey, good. How are you doing?
Yeah, no complaints. Always a good day to be talking about heavy metal. So Katatonia are revisiting Australia for the first time since 2016, I believe. I imagine
Yeah.
you guys are all pretty excited about that.
Yeah. It was before the pandemic last time. God damn it.
And if I remember correctly, that would have been one of the first tours you would have done as a member of Catatonia about a year or so after you joined the band. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I probably had done a couple of tours before then, but I think we did a European tour and a US tour before that one, and a few, festival seasons and stuff like that. But yeah, it was my first time in Australia last time.
Yeah, for
Never
sure.
been there with another band before either. So that was cool.
Is it your most recent visit since as well, or have you been lucky enough to come over here on personal travel or anything like that?
Yeah, we did a festival like a year ago or something, um, in Hobart, I think it was called.
Oh, right. That would have been Dark MOFO Festival in Hobart.
Yeah, so
Very
that was
good.
nice.
Yeah, Dark MOFO is an interesting one. It feels so isolated, and a lot of the shows that go there get exclusivity. So a lot of the
Mm.
rest of the country doesn't end up finding out about it, or it sort of feels like it's
Uh,
almost its own world in some ways. That festival.
it was a weird one for us because on the way down, they lost all of our luggage. I came there with one pick, and that was all the gear we had. So we had to like rent stuff and lend stuff, and but it turned out to be a good gig in the end. And anyway, so
Yeah, nice. And was that one pick all you needed for that show, or
yeah, apparently, yeah,
very
it
good?
worked. Yeah,
Yeah,
and it was the
and
first gig as well with Nico Elistrand from yeah on the second guitar as well there from Entombed, if you know them.
I do know Entombed. Yes, I was going
Yeah.
to pick your brains on some Swedish music a little bit later in the in the interview. Big fan of it. In case you, oh, actually, you can't see my shirt, but I've got a Vertain on at the moment. Another Swedish band. It's fair to say that there's a fair
Oh,
bit going on in that part of the world in terms of heavy music, isn't there?
yeah, I guess there's a lot of death metal stuff coming out of here and black metal stuff, but I don't know shit about it. It's
Yeah,
all of the other guys are all death metal dudes in the band, but I come from old blues and 70s prog stuff, so I
mm.
never really got into that stuff.
Yeah. So I've noticed that you've talked a fair bit about that in the past. So I won't pick your brains on it too much in terms of where you've come from. But one thing I was curious is, reflecting on your time in Catatonia, and you've said in past interviews quite a bit that you didn't actually know a lot about them before you joined.
Oh,
In
I
the
didn't know
first,
them.
it's quite incredible that you've been able to so seamlessly jump in. In terms of your technique as a guitarist, and even just your musical knowledge in general, was there anything in particular that you found interesting learning the Catatonia material to tour it, or was there any techniques that you maybe worked on or developed outside of what at that point you'd been familiar with?
It kind of felt like a mix of stuff that I've played in the past. And what I really liked about it is the absence of rules. Coming from a classical background, I started out with a classical guitar as a kid, and there's so much rules, and all of those rules can hinder you doing things as well. And the other guys, well, like Jonas, who writes most of the stuff, he doesn't have that at all. He just writes straight from the heart. And yeah, that was a new thing for me. And I gathered that is a common thing in death metal as well, kind of breaking the rules,
Mm.
breaking when it comes to harmonics or whatever. So that was kind of a new thing for me. The
Yep.
absence of classical harmonic structure or so.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I find really interesting about Katatonia's music, that I'm a little bit curious about from a practical point of view, is that Jonas has this very distinct vocal style, and I suppose you do a little bit of backing vocal as well, from what I've seen in online videos. I
Yeah,
haven't been lucky enough to see you perform yet, but we'll fix that in about a month's time.
I do all the backing vocals. Yeah,
Yeah,
like,
and when you're working in these guitars that are quite heavy, at times, outright you've got the Swedish chainsaw sound going on, and sometimes it's got quite a bit of doom fuzz to it, and all this is. Do you find it takes a bit of conscious effort to write guitar parts that allow this really sort of ethereal vocal style to not be lost in the mud, or is that just how it happens to turn out?
you shouldn't let one come in the way of the other, I think.
Mm.
It just, yeah. Uh, if it's difficult, you just gotta learn it. I mean, there's a lot of that feels impossible the first time you sit down with it, like polyrhythmically between the vocals and the guitar. But play it through a couple of times and it lands. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think more so from a tonal point of view, that it blows me away that you have such powerful, loud guitars, but on record, especially Jonas's vocals are so delicate at times, yet it never feels like the guitars are overpowering him.
No, he's got a very special voice, Jonas. It's really cool. And it's not strained. It's not a strained voice. It's more of a telling stories voice, which I like. But still cuts through, as you say. It doesn't get drowned by the rest of the music.
Another thing I'm a little bit curious about from a songwriting point of view, now that you've done a few albums with Katatonia, and sort of hopefully gotten in a bit of a rhythm, and in other interviews as well, you've said this is quite an easy album in terms of the studio side of things. It's this really unique balance, I think, Katatonia strike between sticking with a sound that is distinct, and you hear it and you go, oh, that is definitely Katatonia. And I don't think you've ever tried to reinvent the wheel too much in terms of what it is you do, but there's a lot of exploration that goes in terms of the stories you tell on each album and song. And for you guys, is that a matter of just writing what feels right, or do you start an album with a particular end goal in mind and try to do things a bit differently?
I'm not sure. It has to be a good landscape, I guess. It has to fit. But are you talking lyric-wise, or are you talking music-wise? Lyric-wise, I guess it's more of a question for Jonas, because he has written all of the lyrics so
musically
far.
In particular, I think.
Well, it has to, like I say, it's gotta have a good landscape to it, and it has to go somewhere. You're always trying to find new ways, and you're always exploring. Kind of, that's what music is to me. You always, but still, you're you, so you do your thing, but still trying out new stuff within what you're doing, I guess.
Yeah.
It's not outside of, like you say, you can still hear it's Katatonia, whatever we do, even if it's the electronic songs, it still has the Katatonia sound, even though it's not what we usually do.
I think looking back at City Burials for a moment, that was an album in particular that I think maybe we mentioned the pandemic, but as well, for whatever reason, it's been a while since Katatonia have been able to come out besides Dark MOFO to this part of the world. It felt like some of those tracks, Behind the Blood, the lead single in particular, really, to me, felt like a song that was almost destined to be played live. It had that kind of mosh anthem energy, if you want to call it that. Does it
Yeah.
feel unusual going into a tour for a new record, having that backup of material that maybe you haven't as a band been able to give as much airtime as well? Do you find putting a set list for a tour like this together a little bit difficult in that sense?
Not really. But what was sad about the previous album is we never really got to tour on it. We only did one US tour, and that was it.
Mm.
And that was, during that tour, the singles on the previous album was released, a couple of them. So we started playing songs from the new album as well. But yeah, that we released it just before the pandemic. So yeah, kind of got frozen. But those, yeah, of course, we're bringing up songs from that album in the set afterwards. Yes. Behind the Blood, for instance, we often play that one. It's kind of a homage to the old 80s heavy metal, that we grew up with, some of us, the old Judas Priest and Iron Maiden and all that,
Yeah, absolutely. It's got that, it's got a bit of that, particularly Priest is one that came to mind. But again, it's interesting hearing, it's definitely still a Katatonia song, like we were saying earlier, but it definitely nods its head in that direction.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Stretching it out in different directions, but still staying true to the sound of the band. The idea for that one, I think, was born when we actually did a Judas Priest cover for I think it was Metal Hammer thing that they did, some kind of, compilation of, it was with the magazine, and they released that song with us, with a specific magazine, and we recorded an old Judas Priest song, and Jonas had the idea, why don't we do one of those?
Good idea. Do you remember what track it was?
It was a ballad, if you could call it that. Night Comes Down.
Ah, good track. Yep.
Yeah. Kind of a forgotten track. It's not one of the ones you hear on the radio.
No.
But yeah, that was fun. And we played that live a few times as well. It's a fun song to play live.
Well, I know what I'll be listening to after this interview. I'll go have a listen to that cover. It sounds interesting.
Cool.
Another thing that's been going on in the music world a lot has been, unfortunately, the pandemic lockdown shows and the live streams. And I guess that was, you guys did Dead Air, I believe it was called.
Yeah.
And
the only gig during the pandemic.
Yeah.
That was a weird one, playing in front of people from all over the world with no people there, trying to get into gig mode without any people there. Just all of a sudden a camera pops up in your face and what? Yeah, it was really weird, but it was fun.
Yeah.
It was nice doing in that studio as well, Studio Gröndal, with David Castillo behind the desk as well, mixing live, like a proper gig.
Yeah, it was interesting seeing a lot of bands did them, and some did them. You could kind of tell that it was maybe to keep their gig fitness up, their mind for it, to keep in practice. I think some maybe went for more of a message, whether it was saying, "Hey, we're all together in this," or fuck what's going on, or hey, we're still a band, we're still out here. It was kind of interesting seeing the different approaches to it. And I was wondering from Katatonia's point of view, was there anything in particular that you guys took out of it, having that opportunity to practice performing live without a crowd, or was it just to get together and perform?
Yeah, kind of the latter. You're just getting together and do a gig, in a weird way, but still just getting together and doing a gig. And nothing really, no deeper thoughts behind it than that. Just, yeah, let's do a gig. And we knew that people were asking for it, so yeah, cool, we'll do that. And then we got our friend David Castillo there that has this studio that's really close to where we all live, and yeah, it was very easily done. And we called in this team that handled the cameras and the lights and everything as well, that are also based here in Stockholm. So, it was a local effort, I guess, the whole thing.
It's a little tricky in a way to make those shows work. I think you guys did a good job of it, but it almost exposes bands a little bit in that, when you perform live, you have the volume in the room to go off. And I think death metal, doom metal, any sort of heavy progressive music really does at times lean into the volume and the feeling in your chest and in your head when you're in a room like that. And you also don't have your studio production tricks. Like, it was definitely, you could hear it was two guitars, a bassist, a singer, a drummer, and a little bit of extra stuff going on. But do you find it
the same that we use live? I mean, we've always had the keys on tracks. Otherwise, we'd have to have like 7 different keyboard players, and that's not it's not possible. Like,
yeah. Well, so, you can fit them on the stage, but you might not be able to pay for them to travel around, all 7 of them. From a production point of view, the guitars sounded really good, and the drums and bass without having to, some of the bands that went down that route came out a bit tinny because they don't have the volume of the room to fill, or they can't track 5 guitars panned hard left and hard right. Oh, yeah. Is that something that took a little bit of playing around with?
No, not really. We just did what we do live. It's just 2 guitars, and what are you going to do? And back on that one, we even used, because we had all the sounds pre-programmed and we're a bit lazy, used the old GT10s, old Boss GT10s, but with external preamps. Then I think we both used AMT stuff. Russian company from Siberia that makes brilliant tube-driven overdrives, or rather, they sound like amps. I've got one that sounds like an old 800 Marshall, for instance, and they do diesel amps and they do Fender amps and stuff like that. So if you don't do the distortion part in the GT10, it actually sounds really good. All the effects are, Boss make good effects, so it works.
Absolutely.
So one thing about them, you have a latency while switching. That was too much, Trying to handle the vocals and the guitars and that polyrhythmics while having to step on the pedals a little bit earlier than on the beat. That messes with your head. But yeah, that one was recorded with old GT10s, actually, just lined straight out. So nothing fancy, no analog chains of 20 pedals and real amps with tubes and stuff, just digital all the way.
Very impressive. And if anyone's listening to the interview and hasn't checked that out, I think it's all up in parts on YouTube, and you can hear what we're talking about. It's sounds really, really good. So
that's cool. It'll probably a lot to do with the David there as well. He knows his sound. Now I've gone over to the GT1000, but it's it's the same thing basically. Only this one sounds better, but because live you can't do the dancing around on 3 pedals while in every switch, between sounds and trying to tune in BPMs of the delay pedals between every songs, and it's way too much work. That's pretty much why we've gone digital. Now you just press one switch and it's a completely different chain, different amp or whatever. It's sci-fi.
Yeah. It's funny that some people will make the argument of, computers are making it impure, or computers are interrupting, or, making it less about the music. But I kind of argue the opposite. I think that if you as a guitarist are able to go out there and focus more on playing the guitar and less on making the sound perfect with your feet and with the dials, then I think that actually maybe you agree with me that it means that you get to do a better job of just playing the guitar, and that's a more pure thing.
Exactly. And I mean, it's still, the sound is in the fingers anyway. It's not going to be that dramatic. Whatever you do in your chain or what amp you use, it's still basically in your fingers. You should be able to make any amp sound good. I mean, so people tend to hide behind gear. I think way too much. Rely on gear way too much. I have to have this type of amp. I have to have this type of overdrive. I have to have this and this. Back with the Tiamat, it was like they always said we were the easiest band ever, because what we asked for was, the drummer asked for one of each. Okay, we'll do that. And the bass player, an amp. Okay, what amp? Just an amp. And us two guitar players, an amp. Okay, what kind of amp? I don't know. One with a distorted sound and a clean sound. All right. Then that was it. And, when you can play through anything, I guess. You shouldn't be hung up on gear too much, even though I'm a total gear nerd myself. When I'm given the opportunity to nerd out with people, but still, that's mainly, it's like spices sometimes, but it's nothing I would rely on. I mean, last time when we were in Hobart, we got to lend stuff, and we had, instead of all of the different kinds of effect chains that we usually use, we had a clean, a crunch, and a distorted sound, and it worked fine. You don't really need more, but it's fun to have more.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's it. All right, one more question for you before I let you go, and it's bit more of a general question. Thinking about Swedish music, Katatonia come to mind. A huge fan myself of Opeth. People who listen a lot to the show will know that. Ghost, Entombed, Meshuggah, Bathory, Dissection. We could be here naming Swedish bands all day. I think even recently we were lucky enough to have Enslaved. Enslaved from Norway. I've gone and put my foot in my mouth there. Who have I got? Entombed. I've got.
That's kind of music I don't know anything about. The other guys are constantly trying to convince me, but I don't get it.
Well, you like what you like. That's the that's the reality of it. But from the point of view of someone living there, playing in a Swedish heavy band, is there something in the water? Is there something about the culture or the country that makes it such a successful?
We were lucky to grow up when we did during the 80s, when we had a working, proper socialist country. We had access to everything. We could get music lessons for free. It was paid by the state. You could, if you couldn't afford a guitar, they would lend you one without any cost. And you could rehearse. You got rehearsal spaces that you could lend for free. You only had to fill in a list saying that you were there a few times every month, and you had a free rehearsal space. And I think that has contributed to the wave of Swedish music that you've seen like the last 30 years. Because, we had a proper working socialist country back in the day. Now it's very different. Everything is cutting down. And culture is usually the first thing that goes. And it's a totally different climate. So I don't know how long this is going to last. but yeah, we were very lucky to grow up when we did.
Very good.
And I
Well,
think that's how the whole thing happened.
yeah. Well, it looks like we're coming up on time, but if we start going near politics, we might need a whole other phone call booked in for that one. So we can we'll pencil that in for next time.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll let you go, Roger. But if you've got any further comments, any thoughts on the tour coming up, any last things you want to say to the people listening, feel free to now. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing Katatonia touring Australia in February.
Yeah, can't wait. Cool.